Welcome to Code Voices in STEM, the podcast that highlights the experiences, challenges, and career stories of culturally and linguistically diverse women in STEM. Join us as we explore the stories of these inspiring women and learn more about the diverse contributions they are making to the world of science. Here is your host, Dr. Chloe Lim.
Hi everyone, this is Dr. Chloe Lim and you're listening to CALD Voices in STEM, a podcast that highlights the experience, challenges, and career stories of culturally and linguistically diverse women in STEM. I begin today by acknowledging the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people, traditional custodians of the land on which we gather today, and pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and acknowledge the really deep contribution that they make to the life of our city and our region. In this season of CALD Voices in STEM podcast, I am very excited to highlight Canberra women in STEM. And I'm honored to have Isabelle Vu with me today as our podcast guest on this special podcast series. So Isabelle Vu is a staunch intersectional feminist and a diversity, equity, and inclusion advocate focusing on gender equity, cultural diversity, mental health, and the prevention of sexual, domestic, and family violence. In 2023, she was featured in the UN Women Canberra chapter's This Is Us Zine, which focused on celebrating the diversity of women and gender-diverse individuals as role models who have overcome barriers such as disability, race, sexuality, color, cultural and socioeconomic differences to achieve their goals and be where they are today. During her studies at the Australian National University as a psychology student, Isabelle developed an interest in organisational psychology, and after graduating in 2020, she began her career in the management consulting industry. She has previously worked at KPMG and is currently a senior consultant at Deloitte, specialising in change management and strategic communications. So welcome, Isabelle, to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lim, for having me. I'm really excited to be here today.
Oh, fantastic. I'm really happy that you're able to share with us a little bit more about your story. And please call me Chloe. You don't have to call me Dr. Lim. Yeah. So no, thank you so much. And it's been lovely to get to know you as well, especially as a woman who's based in Canberra and who's really passionate about feminism and all things around gender equity as well. So, but before we get into all those details of, I guess, gender equity issues around STEM, can you tell us a little bit more about your background and how did you become interested in STEM?
Yes. No, thanks for that question. I was thinking about it actually, and I think it's a little bit comprehensive, but I think it really stemmed from the fact that I was raised by a single mum. So my mum raised me on her own, and she's always had a huge propensity for mathematics and science. She really enjoyed it when she was a child, and I think that's really extended into her adulthood. And one of my fondest memories I remember was that when I was in year 8, I was struggling to wrap my head around algebra. So I was really enjoying mathematics, but I think my teacher's teaching style didn't quite link up to my learning style. And I remember, bless her heart, she pulled all this knowledge from decades back and sat down with me and taught me how to do algebra overnight, essentially, which made my sort of journey with mathematics a lot more pleasant and enjoyable throughout high school. When my parents separated as well, when I was 5, I also was brought to the Philippines, and I had the wonderful privilege of living there for a few years. And I actually studied in a mathematics science specific school, which was, I think, a wonderful opportunity to really be able to focus on my maths and science skills, and furthered my interest in it too. Then I think when I came to high school, I still very much wanted to pursue mathematics and science. But then I also realized that I also thoroughly enjoyed humanities and the social sciences. So when I got to year 11 and 12, I thought to myself, what sort of a career or what's an area of study that I can pursue that I suppose interlinks the two together? That's when I ultimately came to psychology. And so that's when I decided I want to study psychology because I think it blends quite beautifully the arts and the sciences. And it's one of the very few degrees at the ANU that you can actually study under a Bachelor of Arts or under a Bachelor of Science. So I did under a Bachelor of Science, and that's essentially how I came to know STEM, I think through my schooling, through my family, and then ultimately as a career.
Mm. Yeah, no, that's very interesting because I don't think a lot of people realize that psychology is actually a science. So
That's
people might
right.
think, yeah.
Yes. I think it is one of those interesting careers, and I think it was one of the appeals for me because when I first pursued it, I liked how it was quite broad and it went through all the different areas of psychology. And it almost is, in a way, a bit of a choose your own adventure. There are some certain areas of psychology, for example, like social psychology, that perhaps leans more towards the arts and the social sciences, and then others that are more leaned towards the sciences like biological psychology, neuroscience, for example. And then the particular area that I suppose I became interested in was organizational psychology, which I think blends the two quite well together. And much to the dismay of a lot of students who pursue psychology, they don't realize that actually statistics is quite a large part of it, which I actually thoroughly enjoy. So that worked out in my favor. But that is something that to any listeners who are thinking of pursuing psych, statistics is a part of the course, but I would thoroughly recommend.
So did you, I mean, I remember when I was doing my biomedical science degree, I had to do one course on statistics only in my first year, and then I never touched it ever again, which I think is a bit
Oh,
of a shame because we actually do a lot of stats in what we do as well. So I reckon it's
right.
something that we need to keep learning. But in your course, did you have to do stats for every year of your university, or how did they put the stats in there?
Yes. So in the first year, there was sort of two broad courses, first sem and second semester, and statistics was in all of those courses, but just sort of a small component. And then when you went to your second and third year, you did actually have a core statistic course that you had to do. And I found it really useful because it actually was training us for if we wanted to conduct any studies in the future, that we actually understood what was the scientific and mathematical rigor that was needed in order to actually prove whether something was statistically significant or not. And I think that's where it solidifies the fact that psych is a science,
Mhm.
but it very much has the person and the human at the center of it, which I really
Mm.
appreciate as someone who really is interested and is very passionate about people-centered, I suppose, design. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So what is it about organizational psychology itself that drew you to it?
Yes. I was thinking about this in my second year of psychology. I was thinking, I love all areas of psychology at the moment, and I'm really struggling to choose. But then I did a course on organizational psychology in third year, and I realized, oh, this is probably the first course that I've done that I suppose doesn't just look at the individual on their own, but actually how do they fit within a broader group or a broader organization, and how can we also create tangible and sustainable change on a broader level for organizations as a whole. And it's still something sort of at the very tender age of 24 that I'm still grappling with in terms of I'd very much like to go back to university one day and I think continue my studies. But I also felt that an important part of that is to actually think about, well, how can I solidify my interest in organizational psychology? I think it's actually quite interesting and quite important to have work experience in this space. So I thought, this is really interesting. I like how we talk about things such as nudges. There's a certain degree of sort of behavioral economics with it as well, without leaning sort of too heavily in that place where we're still sort of focusing on the person as a whole. And so ultimately, I thought, what's an area that I can pursue that is linked to organizational psychology? And a lot of my friends and sort of mentors that I spoke to mentioned actually the change management space, which you may or may not have heard of before, is very much aligned for a lot of psychology majors who are wanting to create sustainable and tangible change on a more organizational or industrial level. And that's how essentially I ended up in management consulting and in consulting. I wanted to see what does change management entail and how can I use my skill set, my passion for helping people and actually creating change. And so I ended up going into management consulting, and it's fascinating the things that we do. I suppose on a broad level, it's essentially looking at changes that either individuals or groups of people or organizations undertake, whatever that may entail. It may be a restructuring of their organization. It may be a new piece of technology or equipment is being rolled out through the organization. And so being able to measure what's the extent that these people will be impacted. Do we need to break them down into several groups in terms of low, medium, high? What's their degree of sort of influence as well in this organization? Will they have a critical part to play in really ensuring that this change will be successful? For example, are they a leader and they really need to make sure that they're a change champion or really leading in this space in terms of using this new piece of change or really being at the forefront of this change? And then how can we best support people in that space so that I suppose the changes are mitigated to an extent where it doesn't impact them so perversely, and that they'll also still be willing and on board to go along with the change, which will hopefully be for their benefit and for their organization's benefit too. So my particular passion being someone who's really passionate about DE&I, and it's something that, is a work in progress. And I know that it will probably, hopefully, be something that I'm passionate about and work towards over the course of my career, is that I really want to focus on the changes that we do from a DEI perspective. So when we're doing our consultations, are we also taking into consideration cold individuals or cold women? Are we ensuring that, for example, our website that we're setting up is going to be accessible for people? Whether that is are we considering families in these changes or people with disabilities or neurodiverse individuals? So that's sort of the lens that I like to try and give as much as possible. As someone who's really passionate about DE&I. So I like how, in a way, it feels like it's almost full circle, thinking about the person, how they fit in the organization, and then making sure that particularly marginalized and minority groups are considered in that process as well. And I think that's the only way really to achieve meaningful change, is that if most or all individuals are actually taken into consideration when we are doing something.
Absolutely. I mean, the idea of inclusion in the workplace, it's not just a checkbox, right? It's really thinking about the person, like you said, and considering who do we need to be thinking about, what are the intersectionality that, that comes into play as well. And there's so many, I think, everyone has such different challenges and, different backgrounds, different experiences. And for a workplace to really thrive, it's so important to consider how can we best support every person, regardless of, the sort of challenges that they might be facing, and help them thrive in their workplace as well, in their work. So no, that's fantastic. Yeah. So,
Thank you.
And I think change management is tricky because you are dealing with people, right? And
Exactly.
people are quite resistant to change usually. They are creatures of habit. We would like to do things the way we want to do it and
That's
how we've
right.
always done it. And
I
so
100% agree.
so I'm curious to hear, I guess, when you've moved into more change management work. So did you have like a project or achievement that you're really proud of in this space that you're working in now?
Yeah, I was thinking about this actually, because I think there's always been a few little sort of small achievements I felt so far in my career that I'm proud of. And I hope this is not too simplistic of an answer, but I think ultimately being able to actually, I think, go to university and graduate with my psychology degree for me is probably the biggest achievement, in my opinion. I know that it's probably not as prestigious as a master's degree or a PhD, but I was just reflecting on the fact that my university journey, or I suppose even getting to university, was not easy. And that was due to a number of factors, from sort of financial insecurity, to coming from a low socioeconomic background and from a rural background. I was also the first person in my family to go to university as well. So there were a lot of, I felt, barriers, or it almost felt as if it was an uphill battle from the start. So for me, being able to actually get to university, especially in the group of 8, and then being able to graduate. Unfortunately, the celebrations due to COVID were postponed, but I was still very proud of that achievement nonetheless. I think really stood out to me. And I think that comes ultimately from the fact that as a Filipino woman, I've really seen, living in the Philippines, that education is the biggest enabler to be able to, I suppose, take oneself out of poverty. And even then, there are so many situations in which there are so many wonderful, bright and people who end up graduating and then still really struggling to find a job. So I find that all of the achievements that I've achieved in my career since graduating in 2020 essentially stemmed from and was enabled by the fact that I was able to graduate, and I was able to have that university degree, which not just proves to myself, but I think also proves to society that I am capable and that I'm willing and enthusiastic to learn and grow. So hopefully that's not too much of a simplistic answer, but I think that that's really what stood out to me as I was reflecting on that question, that I'm very proud and feel very blessed to have been able to get to this point. And I think even at this point, I feel very privileged to be able to have options and to think about going back to university and pursuing further study in whatever area of psychology or perhaps business that I want to pursue. And I feel very, very blessed to be able to have those opportunities.
Yeah, no, thanks so much for sharing that. I wouldn't say it's a simplistic thing because, for me, myself as well, right? I didn't think that going overseas to study would have been an option for me because of, financial challenges as well. But I would say, similar to you, being able to go overseas to study was really that enabling mechanism for me to do what I'm doing today. It's that starting point, right? And I think
100%.
yeah, and I think it's really important for people to acknowledge that too, isn't it? It's that the initial opportunity that has been given to you so that then you can use that opportunity for bigger things or
Mm.
bigger impact and bigger influence. And I think that's it. I wouldn't say it's simplistic, definitely not.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
And I think it's also important for people to recognize that your achievements, how achievements are viewed, it's important how you view them, how you view your achievements, right? Regardless of, what people have done or what people say, but that is what is important to you and what you feel is something that has really made a difference in your life. So I think that's amazing. And I mean, even just being a woman who has done STEM, right, and done psychology, I think that's a huge achievement in itself too.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And very
So
rewarding, I think.
oh, I'm really glad to hear. That's really interesting. So, like, I'm curious to understand a bit more. Like, now that you're now working in management consulting,
Mm.
dealing with change management. Were there any challenges that you faced while working through, all these DEI sort of initiatives as a woman in STEM?
Yes. Thank you for that question. I think, and I think much like the similar guests that you've had on the podcast as well so far, there certainly has been challenges, I think, from a personal perspective and also from a professional perspective. A part of me was, I suppose, felt a little bit scared as I was graduating from my psychology degree in 2020. As I was graduating from university, that was when COVID had first started in 2020. And I don't know whether you yourself has experienced this as well, but that was also the height of, I suppose, like anti-Asian racism during that particular
Mm.
period. So it was probably the first time, despite having experienced microaggressions, aggressions in the past, that I suppose myself and my mother, we felt quite unsafe being in Australia as someone who's Australian, who was born here, and almost feeling quite unsure in terms of how do I actually address this, noting that I understand that people are trying to find someone to blame for this pandemic and what's happened to everyone around the world. I think that further solidified the fact that I really wanted to focus more on diversity, equity, inclusion as much as I could. And so kind of coming into the corporate environment, I very much was aware of what racism could look like from a personal perspective, but I wasn't fully quite sure what that actually could look like from a professional environment. So coming into, I went into a sort of medium-sized consulting firm to begin with, and unfortunately, I had to leave not long after due to discrimination, based predominantly on my gender and my caring responsibilities for my mother, as well as sort of my neurodiversity, having ADHD, and with my mental health struggles. Now, in terms of mental health, it's always an interesting conversation topic in Asian circles in particular, because I think it is quite still heavily stigmatized, at least from sort of the discourse that I've had with friends and family and conversations. I think I'm very blessed and fortunate to have quite an understanding mum who did her best with my situation, but certainly I think there is still a lot more that can be done in the space. I think I am also very fortunate to have studied psychology, so I think I understood that more from perhaps an objective or more of a professional standpoint, rather than just seeing things purely from my own perspective as someone with mental ill health. So experiencing that from a professional perspective before I joined KPMG and Deloitte was quite interesting. I think it was it was quite a steep learning curve as my first professional role, but in a way, and I'm not saying this to say that I was happy that that experience occurred, but in a way, I think it taught me a lot in terms of how do I champion for myself and how do I can also ensure that I can provide a psychologically safe space for other individuals so that they won't experience that. And I think it also opened my eyes a lot more to be more considerate about DEI considerations, especially from an intersectional point of view when we are doing our work. And even when I'm working with my own team, if I'm working with my fellow colleagues, if I'm working with much more junior staff, or if I'm working up with senior staff, how can I be considerate of that? How can I be vocal for my needs and what do I need? What do they need from me? And to also just be really clear about how can I provide the best support in a psychologically safe space for my team. And I think that has really, just what's the best way to verbalize this? I think it's just really taught me a lot in terms of how I can create that space and sit very comfortably within that space and not be ashamed as a person of color, as a woman of color, who also has all of these other aspects that, you know, makes, I suppose, us complex and unique. And I think it's also helped me to tell people, as other people as well, to not be apologetic about their unique circumstances and how they can bring their authentic selves to work, whatever that may look like. And so that's sort of, I guess, my particular answer to that question. It's been a bit of a steep learning curve, and I think sometimes when people think, oh, you've made it, you're at this point now, you know, you're well known or whatever it may be, you've had a really successful career. It's actually an ongoing process that I'm sure will continue for many, many more years through my career, and that will shift and change as I get older, as I get more senior. But I think to a degree, I feel very blessed that I've been able to, I suppose, have those lessons quite early on in my career so that I am more cognizant of them, that I can be of them, and that I can actually not just be aware of it, but I can actually do something about it, not just for myself, but for others.
Yeah, I mean, we hear a lot of, I guess, what people share about creating a psychologically safe workplace for everyone. And I think it's, you know, it's so important for us to be mindful of that and be aware of it. Because I think I think sometimes unless you somewhat experience some of these things, that you won't really maybe pay as much attention to it. Would you say so?
I agree. I think it's a combination of, particularly for us as CALD individuals, we've certainly experienced it. And then I think for our allies who may not have, it's important for them to be able to actually hear these stories, and I think hear them consistently and from different people with different perspectives, and noting that my experience will be very different from yours and from all of the other guests that have been on your show as well so far. But all of those have merit and have value, and there are learnings that we can take from each and every single story that's shared.
Yeah, fantastic. And thank you so much for being vulnerable and sharing, you know, your own experience too. I think it's important for people to realize that, you know, these things do happen. And I guess to be more open as well and understanding, because I think part of the reason why we share these stories is because so that we can create more empathy and more kindness to others too. Realizing that, you know, they might be facing some challenges that you may not realize, and regardless of how someone else behaves or how they may think, you know, what we can do, what we can control is how then can we be responding to that person. And I love how, you know, as a result of the challenges that you have faced, that you decided to take the positive stance of creating, you know, a better place for other people so that they can feel safe about their workplace and being them, you know, their authentic self. And that I think is a key thing, is allowing people to be themselves wherever they are, and not to be restricted by societal expectations or work expectations, but to create an environment so that people can do the best work in the best self, right? So thinking about all these things then,
Mm.
what do you think we needs to change then in order to create that psychologically safe space for women of color like you and I in the consulting industry, let's say?
Yes. And I was thinking about this as well. And I think I'm very fortunate being in the change management and strategic communication space. We often look at things from an organizational level. So there are already things that we've really been able to have the chance to help in, such as attraction and retention or recruitment. But I think it's important to almost take a step back and look at it from a holistic sort of life cycle point of view and look about, well, are there role models that actually exist within this space, or any space really, not just in consulting, but whether it's in STEM, whether it's in engineering. I think today is International Day of Women in Engineering, actually. So thinking about that, I remember growing up, and as I said, my mum was one of my biggest inspirations, and I was very fortunate to grow up in a matriarchal society. So that really fostered that sense of feminism and being able to be quite independent and not be apologetic about that. Whereas I know that those lack of role models can have quite a huge impact on, well, as we said, we were both featured in that Zine last year, to actually see it is to be it. Being able to provide that tangibly to someone, and that, I think, as I kind of alluded to earlier, really does stem from education as a standpoint. So not just ensuring that education is a privilege, but it is a right, and that individuals, especially called individuals, are given the space and the opportunities to pursue. I think it's two things. It might be a bit controversial, but not just what you're interested in, but something that you're also good at. And it's something that I often think about. I think it's all well and good to be passionate about something, but I think the reality of the situation that it also has to be something that you do have a natural or perhaps, some sort of propensity towards. So then that aspect of actually getting women or called women in schools, and then actually providing equitable opportunities for them to pursue what they want to pursue. So is that in the form of grants, scholarship, financial assistance, whatever that may be. And then after that, actually ensuring that these women or these called individuals actually do have opportunities to put those skills to use by getting jobs. So I've had a lot of female friends who were ridiculously smart and bright, had wonderful achievements, but who were really struggling to find jobs after graduating with, for example, an engineering degree. And a lot of that came from perhaps that unconscious bias or this level of comfortability where we're going to hire these men because they've always done their jobs well, or this is predominantly a male industry. So they'll struggle even if they do come in. And then once they actually get their foot in their door, are they actually being celebrated and appreciated? And does that come in the form of, obviously vocal acknowledgement and being given opportunities and projects that are aligned with their skill set and their passions? Are they being remunerated properly and are being promoted properly? Because I think one of the things that I still see until now, particularly, I can only really talk about my own industry, but in the consulting industry, I find I'm working with so many wonderfully bright, amazing called women. But then there is sort of this glass or bamboo ceiling as we get to sort of that upper management level. And I think to myself, why? What's happening there that they're not being promoted up when I know that they're fully capable? And so actually getting to that point where it's, as you said, people at different levels. So as a student or as a young person or as a child, and then a high school student, and then a university student, and then a junior staff member, and then someone in management, and then a senior person. So I think there is that degree of accountability to ourselves to foster that. But I think it is also really important to acknowledge that you need to be kind to yourself. There are a lot of barriers, and this is an uphill battle, and the onus is, to a degree, I agree, on us to make sure that we can create change. But our allies also need to play a remarkable part in supporting us in our endeavors. And I think that's where mentorship really comes into play within your own organization or industry and outside of. So I use LinkedIn personally to be able to do that. That's how you and I, Chloe, were able to meet, and so many other individuals that you and I have sort of in our mutual circle. So the onus is on you, I think, certainly to be able to surround yourself with the best people who have your best interests at heart. And I remember reading this quote about, I think, surround yourself with people who will bring up your name in a room full of opportunities if you're not in that room, or something like that. And then if you surround yourself by the right people, I think those individuals will also be able to propagate you forward in the right direction, because it's unfortunate, but that we're in this situation sometimes, that there are so many barriers and hurdles that we need to overcome. And it is also not fair that it's also only on us. It really needs to go sort of two ways, in that you can be the most brilliant person, but you also need to be in the right organization with the right people, for example. And so it is a bit of that balancing act, sort of from a pragmatic point of view. Yes.
Yeah, but I think the responsibility is not just on us, like you say. We do our best to control what we can do, and that is, to keep improving ourselves, skilling up, and speaking up, and showcasing our and how we can then be doing that in an authentic way as well. And like you said, there also needs to be that systemic change, isn't it? It's not just us, but then we have all these other people around us, because the workplace itself is not an individual entity. Like you say, it's an organization made up of many, many people. And so we need to have that collective change to move change into the direction that we want. Yeah. So definitely it's a call for people to be open and understanding to what sort of things that we need to set in place so that we can have that equity in helping women to do the best work as well. So you've given quite a lot of great, ideas and great tips on how a woman in STEM can go in, like how she can scale the heights in their careers in a way. But do you have any other advice that you'd like to give for someone who's starting off in STEM? What should they be thinking about, or how would be your advice to other women pursuing a career in STEM?
Yes. That's a great question. And it's something that I've thought about as well, in terms of what would you say to a younger version of yourself?
That's right.
I think it was certainly a learning journey. And I think a big part of it was almost, I felt that I was just taking one step at a time, and I wasn't quite fully sure where to go. So hopefully this will provide a bit more direction. But I think, building on my previous point, it is, and I know that this has been a common theme as well, which I really solidly support throughout the show, is that it is really important to surround yourself with the right people, whatever that may look like. And that will probably change at every phase of your life. So I often say, as someone who was the first person in my family to go to university, and being very new as well, I was from Goulburn originally, then I came to Canberra. So I was adjusting to the city and to the university environment. I wasn't really sure what I was doing. And these beautiful honours and PhD students, I think I just reached out to them. I think it was at a social event of some sort, and they just took me under their wing, and they gave me all of this guidance on how to navigate things as a first year, in terms of the most simplest things now looking back, but at the time they meant so much to me, and they made a world of difference, in terms of, this is where your class is, this is how you apply for tutorials, this is a way that you can do referencing that's not wasting all of your time. And so surrounding yourself with people like that, because now the people that I surround myself with are probably more in terms aligned of what I'm actually doing in my career. So mentors that I have that are a few more levels above me, and even sort of my colleagues at the same level as me, and then being able to sort of mentor more junior staff members, being able to pay it forward from the kindness that I was shown pretty much since I was a young child. So being able to surround yourself with the right people and mentors. And then from that as well, it's okay to be afraid. I think being a called person, sometimes I think we put a lot of onus on ourselves to be able to really make change. And to a degree, we almost represent, I sometimes feel like I'm representing a lot of Asian women, or I have a lot of friends who feel like they're really representing like a specific demographic, and what they do not just reflects on them, but on their family or on the community that they represent. So I think it's understandable to be afraid, but I think you need to also be kind to yourself and understand that, yes, there is that almost self-inflicted onus that you've put on yourself, and maybe to a degree because of sort of our culture to a degree. about wanting to make myself proud, my family proud, wanting to really make a name for myself and do well, not just for my sake, but for the people who have brought me to this point. But you will not always succeed, and that's all right. And I think what failure necessarily looks like is it may not be something that you anticipate, and what success looks like may not also be something that you've anticipated. Don't also silo yourself. When I studied psychology, I really thought that I would just take the typical pathway of doing an honours year, then a master's degree, and then I would be a psychologist. And then I realized, actually, I want to do something a bit different for now. I may want to go back to that in the future. So I think we're very fortunate, at least I feel that in my position, and a lot of women, I think, who may be living in Australia or called individuals in Australia, I think we're fairly fortunate to have some options at least available to us. Maybe not all options available to individuals who may not be from called communities, but I think if you have that foot in door opportunity, there are sort of pathways that you can take, and it may not be one that you necessarily thought that you would undertake, and that's all right. I think see how the journey takes you and take learnings from that, because I certainly did not expect to end up in consulting. And I'm still very much enjoying it now. And there are a lot of transferable skills that I've learned that I can probably take somewhere else in the future if that's what I want to pursue. So I think keep an open mind, surround yourself by the right people, and also be kind to yourself when things don't turn out the way that you thought that they would be. I sometimes tend to have a bit of a life plan, and that doesn't always work out. And so one of the things I've tried to do is be kind to myself and think, all right, well, what can I do next? Noting that this has happened. No, I didn't anticipate this. COVID, for example, right? What can I
No
do
one
now?
anticipated that one. Yes.
Or, you're facing a very difficult project. Use those support networks that you have in place. And that's a good reminder as well to remind yourself that you're not alone. There are other individuals out there as well who are from called backgrounds, women and men. There's a really great online community now on LinkedIn that you can connect with like-minded individuals, or even within your own organization. So I think just remind yourself and ground yourself that you're not alone, and that you can address this one step at a time. And it's okay that sometimes you feel like you're not really sure where it's going, but you will keep moving forward. And I think that's the great thing about time. It'll keep moving whether we want it to or not, and it'll take us to a better place.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. That's lots of great advice that I hope our listeners will be able to take on board as well.
I feel I talk too much.
No, I think it's good. It's good. And we need to hear more from, like you said, right? It's representation, and to be able to hear all the tips that you can give, all the advice, and how we can be helping others. So all of what you say is lifting others up, and I think that's really great. So I want to thank you for sharing your stories and insights with us today. It's been really good. As you know, we've heard about how your STEM journey started from a maths and science school, and how your mom really put in that effort to help you with your maths as well, and towards reaching your significant achievement of graduating at university, being the first person in your family to do that. I think that's a huge achievement and something to be really proud of, for sure. And I love how your love for organizational psychology has now moved you into change management and really trying to make an impact in the diversity, equity and inclusion space. And from your own experience, to try and create that psychologically safe space for your team and the people around you as well. And thanks again so much for sharing that advice about, I think what I've been hearing a lot through our conversation today is the idea of being kind to yourself. I think I'm not sure about our listeners. I know that I'm a high achiever, and there's a lot of overachievers out there, and I think you're one of them too. And and we have that tendency to expect so much of ourselves, and when we fall or when we fail, we feel like we're such a failure, or things could have been better, or just I feel like success is the only way to go, type of thing. But then all those points of failure are actually, like you said, opportunities for learnings. And it's so important that when those things happen, that, we take a breath and we think about how far we've come, and that we show kindness to ourselves at that point as well. So I really want to thank you again, Isabelle, for that. So tell us, how can our listeners be connecting with you if they like to connect with you?
Of course. I'm still very much trying to practice being kind to myself as well. So if that's something of interest, or anything else that I've discussed here, please find me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to send through the link to you, Chloe. Just
Yeah,
Isabelle Vu on LinkedIn. Thank you.
fantastic. No, I'll definitely drop it in the show notes so people can find it and connect with you. So thanks again, Isabel, for sharing today. It was a great conversation. I really hope that our listeners will get much. I'm sure they will actually. They will get much from this episode. So thanks again, Isabel.
Thank you for your time, Chloe.
So we've reached the end of our show. So thanks for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please share it with others or leave a rating and review. Now, if you have any questions about the things we covered in the show or would like to follow my projects, please find me on Instagram and LinkedIn. Thanks for tuning in today, and I'll see you at the next episode.
Thanks for listening to the Code Voices in STEM podcast. Get the show notes, links, and resources from today's episode by visiting drchloelim.com.